From the Free Press, this is Honestly, and I'm Barry Weiss. There are people who have resumes that we might call diverse or wide-ranging. And then there are people like Mike Huckabee, who at age 69 has seemingly crammed several lifetimes' worth of careers into one. Huckabee was a televangelist. Then he was governor of Arkansas for more than a decade. He ran for president and actually won the Iowa caucuses in 2016. It feels like 1,000 years ago. He hosted his own show on Fox News for more than 7 years, and he's written books on everything from Christmas to weight loss. And now Mike Huckabee is America's ambassador to Israel, and he's filling that post at a time where the longtime status quo in Israel and the region is being upended. Israel is inching closer to eradicating Hamas in Gaza, but the day-after plan for the Strip is unclear. Iran, meantime, is feared to be on the cusp of achieving nuclear weapons, and Trump and Steve Witkoff are trying hard to close a renewed Iran nuclear deal. Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and maybe even Syria could be normalizing relations with Israel in the near future. But Islamist terror groups are trying mightily to derail any attempts at normalization. And all the while, American adversaries like China and Russia are trying to take advantage of any instability in the region. Suffice it to say, it's a time of great uncertainty, or if you're an optimist, great promise. Mike Huckabee is in some ways redefining what it means to be an ambassador to Israel. He's been outspoken in criticizing inaccurate press accounts about the conflict and unabashed in his support for the Jewish state. And while most ambassadors largely exist behind the scenes, Mike Huckabee has been in front of the cameras, making the case for Israel and its war against Hamas directly to the American people. It could even be argued that he's making a better case for Israel than the Israeli government itself. So today on Honestly, Ambassador Mike Huckabee from Jerusalem. We discuss all of that and more, including the rise of antisemitism in America and the West more broadly, the future of America's involvement in the Middle East, and the fight, the civil war going on inside Trump's second presidency about what American foreign policy should be toward the Middle East and more broadly. One final note. The ambassador was on the call from Jerusalem, and at around 10 p.m. his time, the rocket sirens started sounding, and the ambassador, along with everyone else in Jerusalem, had 90 seconds to get to the shelter. It's something that's become normalized in Israeli life. Talk to any parents, and they'll talk about having to wake their kids up several times often in a week because of these sirens. But it also serves as a constant reminder of the persistent threat that Israel faces, and not just from Hamas. There were a lot of other things that I wanted to ask him about, particularly about the Jew hatred that's becoming more and more normalized on the online right. But we'll have to have him back. The conversation is thought-provoking, important, timely, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Stay with us. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, welcome to Honestly.
Hey, what a pleasure to be with you, Barry. Thank you for inviting me. I love what you have been doing. Your writing is brilliant, and it's a joy to be on your podcast. So thanks for having me.
Thanks. I know it's a little later in Jerusalem, so thanks for making it happen. You've done a lot of things in your life. You were a televangelist. You were governor of Arkansas for a decade, of course. You ran for president in 2016. This feels like 1,000 years ago now, and actually won the Iowa caucuses. You've hosted a Fox show. You've written books on everything from Christmas to weight loss. And now you are ambassador to Israel, dropped into the hottest place on earth, both literally on many days in the summer, but also, of course, figuratively. And I just wanted to start by asking you how that's going.
It's going great. I know I'm where I'm supposed to be. My first trip to Israel, Barry, came 52 years ago, July of 1973, before you were born. Before most people were born, in fact, if we look at it very honestly. But I was 17 years old. I just finished high school. I was headed to college that fall. And I had the chance of a lifetime to come to the Middle East. And I went all over. Went to Lebanon, went to Syria, went to Jordan, went to Turkey, Greece, to Cyprus. Then I came to Israel.
And Mike, had the Yom Kippur War happened yet?
Not yet. It would happen in October. So it was just before the Yom Kippur War, which of course we didn't know was going to happen. In fact, Israel didn't know it was going to happen either. It was one of their real huge intelligence failures that they didn't know. But I came here and something connected in me that I can only describe in spiritual terms, because it was not that Israel was the most beautiful place on earth. It wasn't. It looked in 1973 much more like a third world country. Its economy was struggling. People lived on kibbutzim mainly because they had to survive. There was not an enormous level of business. It was long before startup nation, incredible technology boom had happened in this country. And so it was in some ways a primitive country fighting for its existence and still trying to find its footing. It was dusty, dirty, rocky. The places in the desert were truly desert and much less than that. And something, though, spoke to me deeply. And I knew that this was a special land. And I came, of course, from a spiritual place, believing that it was God's land, that he had given this place to his people, the Jewish people, for his purpose. And I was overwhelmed by that sense that this was the home of the Jewish state, not since 1948, but for 3,800 years. And the connection that the Jewish people had to this land did not go back to Ben Gurion. It went back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So for me, it was an incredible moment of awakening. And I started coming back in 1981, bringing groups. And over the years, I brought tens of thousands of people to see Israel firsthand. I've been here over 100 times before I came as ambassador.
Wow.
So it's a place I've really felt at home. I told somebody, I'm not going to need a tourist map when I get to Jerusalem. And truly, my wife and I, when we got here, it felt like we were at home. And I say this honestly, I'd rather live in Jerusalem every day of the week and twice on Sunday than to ever live in Washington, D.C. It's the only thing the president could have asked me to do that I would have said yes to. I had no interest in babysitting some bloated bureaucracy in D.C. Didn't really want a federal job. I was loving the private sector and living a good life and hosting a television show, writing books, making speeches. It was a great life, and I was close to all 7 of my grandchildren. But when President Trump called me just a few days after the election, and of course, as you know, Barry, he doesn't ask you, he tells you. So he calls and he says, Mike, you're going to Jerusalem, you're going to Israel, you're going to be my ambassador there. And it's, for me, an Isaiah moment. Here am I, Lord, send me. And here am I. And I'm absolutely ecstatic to be in this position at such a time as this. And I consider it an incredible privilege to serve this president, my country, and to be able to represent the United States to the state of Israel.
So you talk about going to Israel in 1973 when it was a young country that was in certain ways a third world country fighting for its existence. You know, in many ways, that reality became apparent once again on October 7th, 2023, where the country that was sort of vaunted as the startup nation, all of these incredible technological advances, one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world, was overrun by a group of terrorists on motorbike and hand glider and experienced the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It's been more than 600 days since that massacre, and the war is still going on. And I guess I have kind of 2 questions here. One is simple, which is Israel winning the war? And the second is that from the beginning, Netanyahu and the Israeli government has said that there are 2 goals of the war: getting all of the hostages home and defeating Hamas. And it's always seemed to me that those goals are incompatible, because if you want to free all of the hostages, you necessarily have to work with, and to some extent, legitimize Hamas and empower them, and therefore not defeat them. So I wondered if you could contend with that as well. Are those 2 goals of the war fundamentally incompatible?
Barry, I don't think they're incompatible. I think they're both necessary. President Trump has been the one who has said repeatedly, Hamas has no future in Gaza, and Hamas will never govern Gaza. I mean, it's really asking, should the Nazis have been given an opportunity to stay in Germany and continue to govern there? Because we just got tired of the war, and there were so many lives that were being destroyed by it, civilian and military, that it became cumbersome. Now, if the Brits had had that view, and if Winston Churchill had gone and said to Hitler, this thing has gone on a long time, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to call it a draw. You withdraw from some of the other European countries. You can keep Germany. You can just go ahead and have at it. Would anyone look back and say, what a wonderful, brilliant diplomatic move that was by Winston Churchill? No one would say that. So I get angry when I see the Brits try to impose some ridiculous view toward Israel and tell them, just end this thing, just stop it. Because to do so means that you're going to not only reward Hamas for what they did on October 7th, because that's what it'll be. It'll be a victory for them. It'll be a reward for them. And the worst of all, it will incentivize more October 7ths and more hostage taking because it will prove it works. So what? They lost a bunch, maybe 20,000 of their civilians. We don't know how many because their numbers are not accurate. Their numbers are always inflated, and they killed a lot of their own people because they put their people right in the middle of a military asset, and they knew they were doing it. And the Israelis had said, get your people out of this place because we're going to attack it. And they amassed their people in that place. I can't say it enough. The reason this war has lasted as long as it has is because of Hamas. The reason the hostages are not home yet, all of them, is because of Hamas. And the reason Hamas has not sat down and ever taken seriously any of the options that they've been given is because they don't want this to end. They have repeatedly said they want another October 7th. They wouldn't hesitate a minute to do it all over again, even at the expense of the entire infrastructure of Gaza and all the people who have died because they have been stubborn in this war. So I hope that the president and the prime minister of Israel continue their understanding that letting Hamas win is an unacceptable outcome. We want the hostages home. We had the remains of 2 more Americans that were released today. I pray they all come home. I'm wearing, you probably can see it, maybe you can here on my lapel, the yellow ribbon. I wear it every day. And people say, what is it you hope to do as ambassador? I'll tell you, the first thing I hope to do is take this yellow pin off, this ribbon. I want to take it off and never, ever again have to wear it. Because that means every hostage, living and dead, are home with their families. When that happens, that'll be the best day of my life since I have arrived here in Jerusalem.
Well, there are more than 50 hostages, alive and dead, still in Gaza.
Yeah.
You know, right now, Israel and Hamas are negotiating this potential 60-day ceasefire, which calls for the release of 10 hostages that are alive and 18 of the bodies in exchange, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, for the release of over 1,000 Gazan prisoners, as well as aid and a ceasefire. These terms being hammered out, of course, by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. What do you think about the terms of that deal, especially when you think about the fact that the impossible situation Israel's in, considering that, you know, the mastermind of this attack was released in exchange for Gilad Shalit? What do you think about the terms of this deal?
You know, it's up really to Israel to determine whether it's a good deal or not. They're the ones who have to live with it. And my role as an ambassador is to not make their policy. In fact, my role is not even to make our policy. I carry ours out at the behest of the president. But let's take what you said at face value. The mastermind of October the 7th was one of those people who got released in a previous prisoner exchange that was incredibly disproportionate to the number of people who were released to Israel compared to the number of people that were released back into the Palestinian world. I'm not sure looking back that people would say, what a good trade that turned out to be. Now, for the families of those who released, wonderful trade. But we always have to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate price that we're paying? I meet with hostage families every week. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow with 2 different hostage families. I also have another call with the families of those whose remains were released today. So it's on my mind all the time. And I wish I could offer comfort. I wish I could give them a guarantee that their loved ones are going to come home today, tomorrow, this week. Some of them are frustrated. I totally understand it. I tell them, I don't know how you feel. I'm not going to say, oh, I know how you feel, because I don't. My children haven't been kidnapped and held and tortured by these savages. But if they were, I'd probably say, do whatever you got to do. I don't care what the price is, get my kid home. And I understand that. And I do feel for them and for that. But I know that Israel wants the hostages out. When I hear people say, well, Netanyahu, he doesn't even want the hostages out. He just wants to keep this war going. I've spent more time with the prime minister than I have with my wife since I have deployed here. And I can tell you that is not true. This is a prime minister who, as much as anyone, would like to see the war end. There's no benefit for anyone in this. But he also understands that if he lets Hamas have a victory and they go and declare the world that they have won, that they have outlasted the Jewish state of Israel, there will be a time that, and it probably won't be that long, that this evil snake will come back out of the basket and bite again. And I think the president is right when he says Hamas has no future here and they can never, ever rule here again.
Well, the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, just wrote this, I think it was a day or so ago. I'm sure you saw it. I believe Netanyahu genuinely wants all of the hostages home, he wrote. But when this clashes with immediate threats to his political survival, he prefers leaving them in Gaza. Now, this is the former Prime Minister of Israel. This is a view shared by a lot of Israelis. You're saying this is fundamentally wrong. And the idea, of course, just to deepen it is, the subtext behind a statement like that is Benjamin Netanyahu wants to avoid some of these corruption allegations that have dogged him, a trial involved, and also wants to avoid sort of a deeper investigation into the security failure that happened on 10/7. Many of the members of his war cabinet, many of the leadership, the top brass of the Israeli military have apologized and resigned. There's been no such apology from Bibi. Your comment?
Yeah, I think it's completely out of line for the former prime minister to condemn the current prime minister. Again, I'm not taking sides in the Israeli political front. It's not my job to pick their leaders. It's not my job to determine who's right, who's wrong. But on this particular issue, for a former prime minister to say that the current prime minister is more interested in his political future than he is to bring the hostages home, unless he's in his head and his heart, I think that's an outrageous statement. And it is not what I have observed. And as I said, I've spent more time with the prime minister than with my wife since I've been here. Sometimes it's not uncommon that I'm at the prime minister's office till well after midnight. I've never sensed that this is a prime minister who gets up every morning and says, how can I survive? What he's thinking about is, how can I make sure that October 7th never happens again? How do we get these hostages home? How do we make sure that Hamas does not survive this so that they have some encouragement to do it again and to give encouragement to other Iranian proxy groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis, which continue to attack? It's a tough spot. I wish there was a simple answer. If there was, I think he would have taken it. But here's what people need to be reminded of. Israel has put many offers on the table. Israel right now has said they will let Hamas leave. They will put them on planes and they will fly them in exile to wherever they want to go. That's as generous as it's going to get. But Hamas would be wise to take that deal, because the other option is they stay put, they continue to torture the hostages, and none of them will survive it. So it really comes up to them.
Before we pan out, I want to talk about Qatar and Iran, of course, which has already come up in the conversation. I want to ask you, I guess it's sort of a philosophical question. There's a lot of people who say Hamas cannot be defeated. And there's sort of two prongs to that position. One is that Israel seems to clear an area and use incredible force to do so. And then you read in the papers 4 weeks later, they're back in that same area, whether it's a hospital where Hamas fighters are hiding or what. And it just seems to be this endless game of cat and mouse. The other thing they say is Hamas is Islamic radicalism. Hamas is jihad. Hamas is a set of ideas. And even if you succeed in decapitating the leadership, even if you take out Sinwar and his family and his brothers, you will not be able to defeat Hamas. And maybe it will come in the guise of another name. Maybe it will be called Islamic Jihad. Maybe it will be called ISIS, whatever. The point is, it's not actually possible. And perhaps the lesson of the past 20 years makes this plain, to defeat the group. What do you say to the people that make that argument?
Well, I think that's an accurate reflection to say that Islamicism is going to happen in some form or another until there is a realization on their part, which I don't expect, that their approach to the civilization of the world is not only just completely wrong, but it's immoral, and that it's destructive not only to others but to themselves. But I think you have to look at it from a localized standpoint. The Hamas force that came out of Gaza is the Hamas we're talking about. It's not the overall worldwide issue of radical Shiite or even radical Sunni Muslims. It is the world of those who went across the border, many of whom had been in the very homes of the people they went and murdered. People in the kibbutz near Gaza were some of the most peaceful, loving people in Israel, and believed that they could make friends, and they invited them to their homes. They had relationships. And then on October the 7th, those very people came to their homes not to have dinner with them, but to slash their throats, rape their women, burn their babies in front of their own children, and then to capture it on video so the world could see how proud they were of the atrocities they committed. Vicious, humiliating, mutilation of Jewish people for no reason other than they were Jewish. And I'm not Jew, but I'm telling you, that is so offensive, so repulsive to me. And it goes to the very heart of, are we a civilized people or are we not? And if we're civilized, you don't look at that kind of behavior and say, we're just going to have to live with some of it. No, you're going to have to root it out when you can, and hopefully isolate it when you can't root it out. But you don't welcome it and you don't appease it, because to do so would have been doing exactly what would have happened had Neville Chamberlain been in charge of Britain instead of Winston Churchill, and that is to appease the Nazis and somehow think that they were going to behave better if you were nice to them.
But the amazing thing, though,
nice
Mike, is that people do not feel the way that you feel. They do not feel, huge numbers of people in the West, especially young people.
Yeah.
They do not feel the kind of disgust you feel. They feel in some way, as unfortunate as those baby burnings and the raping of women might have been, it's fundamentally, the cry of the subaltern. It is the language, they would say, of the oppressed crying out for their liberation. They would also take issue with the notion that, with the analogies you've made to World War II, they would say, no. It's Israel that needs to be compared to the Nazis. They are the ones carrying out a genocide against the Palestinian people. Respond to that.
If this were genocide, there wouldn't be anyone left in Gaza. They could have completely wiped it all out. But they have been methodical and intentional in trying to root out Hamas, not the civilian population. I think a lot of the things that are thrown at Israel are so incredibly, not only unfair, but unfair doesn't get it. It's ill-informed. When I hear people say Israel is an apartheid state, I think, what an idiot would say that. How many people who say that realize that there are Muslims who are in the Israeli Knesset who help govern the country? How many people who say that on apartheid state, Muslims don't have a chance, Palestinians don't have a chance? How many of them know that Palestinians serve on the Israeli Supreme Court? And in fact, it was a Palestinian, a Muslim judge, who convicted a former president and a former prime minister of crimes that sent them to prison. How many people know that, who get out there and say from the river to the sea? I doubt very many. How many of them understand that if they go to Hadassah Medical, there will be medical doctors, some Palestinian, some Jewish, working side by side in surgery, in caring for patients, and the patients they care for, some are Jewish, some are Arab or Palestinian. And nobody asks, what's your ethnicity? I'm not going to treat you if you're not the same ethnicity as me. It's an absolutely unfair canard that is thrown at Israel in particular, but the Jewish people in general. And it is totally unfounded, and it's simply untrue. And I say that not from reading a book or listening to a TV interview. I say it because I've been coming here for 52 years. I've witnessed with my own eyes, heard it with my own ears. It's just not true. And I'm feeling that one of the major things that is a job for me is to try to be a truth teller and to try to say, look, come to Israel and look for yourself and see for yourself and talk to the people and Don't let somebody lead you around with a ring in your nose and tell you what to believe. Come with an objective mind, not some mind that you're paid by some Qatari government and you're sort of led to believe something. Come on your own. See it for yourself and tell me what your conclusions are. That to me would have credibility.
Okay, well, Mike, given that you just brought up Qatar, I definitely want to talk about that topic. We recently ran a big investigation in the Free Press called How Qatar Bought America, and it was full of just like pretty astonishing data about the kinds of investments strategically and frankly brilliantly, putting the morality of it aside, that Qatar has made into this country, universities, think tanks, including even people in the Trump administration. Trump was just on a Middle East tour through the Gulf, and clearly thinks highly of many of the ruling families in Saudi, the UAE, and Qatar. And there's many people in his administration that have previously had connections to Qatar: Pam Bondi, Susie Wiles, Kash Patel, Steve Witkoff, obviously, with the investment in the Park Lane Hotel. And I guess I'm wondering a broad question, putting the question of the plane and the legality of the plane to the side. Does not just Trump's relationship to Qatar, not just the White House's relationship with Qatar, but our relationship to Qatar, does it concern you? Because a lot of these people come back and they say, well, you know, Qatar is an ally of the United States, the biggest air base in the Middle East, biggest military base in the Middle East. Al Udeid is in Qatar. So why should it be a big deal if Pam Bondi is acting as a lobbyist for Qatar? We ourselves have a base there. And yet at the same time, they play host to Al Jazeera with the most anti-Semitic propaganda, government-run propaganda station, radicalizing hundreds of millions of people in the Middle East. Help people make sense of it, because it's a very complicated topic.
You said it well. It's a very complicated topic. I would like to think, because some of these people I know pretty well, Pam Bondi being one of them, a person with, I think, impeccable integrity. I'd like to think that whatever business associations they may have had in the past, they set them aside in their government service and they look at things objectively. And it's necessary. I went to Doha once. I was there to make a speech. I was impressed with some of the things I saw, but I also recognize that as long as they're sponsoring Al Jazeera, as long as they were harboring Hamas leadership, letting them live large in Doha while their henchmen were murdering people in Gaza, it's hard to say, oh, they're always our friend. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they have done things that are very helpful to the United States. But for them to be completely trusted, they need to disassociate from the Muslim Brotherhood. They would need to either get rid of or certainly revamp Al Jazeera and turn it into something other than a Muslim Brotherhood mouth, which has been very destructive. And sadly, a lot of American media take what Al Jazeera says as the gospel and parrot it back as if it's valid
but Mike,
and truthful.
They could, you talk about an overhaul of Al Jazeera. They could do that right now. They could go and behead the head of Al Jazeera right now, and no one would get in trouble. Like, it's not a democracy. So what can we take from that? Like, I think the big question hanging over the Qatar story is, are they true believers or not? Is the reason that they have played host to all of these terrorist organization, at least the leadership of this organization, is the reason that they welcomed in the Muslim Brotherhood when other countries were purging the Muslim Brotherhood, is the reason that they fund an anti-Semitic propaganda station reaching like 400 million people across the Arab world, because they actually believe it or not. Which is it?
And I think the honest answer for me is, I don't know. But do I believe that they're always acting in the best interest of the United States? I don't personally believe that. Can we do business with them? Yeah, probably so. We can do business with a lot of people. But we also have to be willing to put pressure. And that pressure needs to be, quit funding these radical education programs at universities. They've spent billions of dollars indoctrinating college students. And some of them are the ones we see that now are going out chanting from the river to the sea on some of the most prestigious campuses in the U.S. That's disturbing. You mentioned before, it has been a brilliant and it's been an effective strategy, but it's also brought real complications to the ongoing long-term peace process in the Middle East and the rest of the world.
Does it concern you when Steve Witkoff says that Qatar is, quote, doing God's work?
Well, I haven't heard him say that. That would be very interesting if he did say that.
He did. He did say
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Steve and I might have a different view of Qatar and how trustworthy they are, but we're playing for the same team, playing for the same president. I'm not going to criticize or condemn him. He may be working in a way that is ultimately going to be helpful, whether it's with dealing with Hamas or dealing with Iran. I hope so. But I have a lot of doubt about whether, for example, negotiations with people who are inherently sponsoring evil things are going to be trustworthy to do the right thing, the best thing, and the good thing when it really comes down to it.
You know the region very well, as you've talked about. You made more than 100 trips before you became ambassador. Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump have a broad view of deal making in this region, which is like basically, as Neil Ferguson put it in our pages this week, real estateism. It's realism has been replaced with real estateism. Realpolitik has been replaced with reality TV politic. Do you think that the lessons that one learns in Midtown Manhattan real estate can be effectively applied to peacemaking in the Middle East?
With Donald Trump, I think the answer is yes. And here's why I'm saying that, Barry, because when I look at some of the things that he has done, bringing about the Abraham Accords, the bold moves he did that are so incredible for an American president, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the undivided, indisputable indigenous capital of the Jewish state, recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, recognizing Israel has a right to go into Judea and Samaria without violating international law. I mean, over and over, this is a president who has demonstrated an uncanny willingness to stand with the state of Israel and the Jewish people. That's incredibly valuable. But he's done other things that I think maybe he doesn't get full credit for. He goes to Saudi Arabia, and unlike presidents who would say, we want to change your government, we want you to be different, then we'll do business with you. His approach is, we'll do business with you, and how you do your government is up to you and your people. He's transactional in that way. And I tell people about Donald Trump all the time. You can't understand him if you try to see him in an ideological spectrum that is horizontal, the left, the right, the liberal, the conservative, the Democrat, and the Republican. President Trump usually approaches every issue with two questions. Will it work? And will it make things better? He's the ultimate pragmatist. And if it works and if it makes things better, but it falls a little left of center, he doesn't care. It's not an ideological test. He's not like so many political figures who say, okay, what is the conservative view? Let me look at the options, all of which have to be right of center. I won't consider it if it isn't, even if they failed every time they've been tried. He looks at it and says, will it work and will it make things better? And that's how he's going to make the decision. And the decisions that he has made, for example, when he surprised everybody on his trip to Saudi Arabia and met with the new leader of Syria, and said, we're going to take the sanctions off. And everybody was like, what in the world? But here's what he understood intuitively that a lot of people wouldn't have understood. We don't know if we can completely trust this leader. We don't know if he's going to work with us and try to make peace with Israel and the other partners in the Middle East. We don't know. But we know that if we don't step in and build an alliance, he will find one. It might be with the Iranians. It could be with China, none of which are good for anybody in the Middle East, none of which are good for the United States of America. So what he does, he goes in, shatters all conventional diplomatic theory, and he says, maybe we can make this work. And if we do, it reconfigures the entire Middle East, and it adds to the Abraham Accords and the countries that will be part of it. Let's hope he's right, because everything else that's been tried has proven to be wrong.
We know that Trump is vulnerable to flattery and also, weak for things that help his own business and the business of his family, which is obviously the context of a lot of the outrage around the gift of the Qatari luxury jet. First of all, do you agree with that assessment of the president? And does that concern you?
I don't agree with it at all, because he gave up more than he's ever been able to get. People forget that when he ran for president, he walked away from an empire, an extraordinary wealth. He didn't even take his salary, for heaven's sakes. This is a president who said, I'm going to give every penny of my salary to charity. Who else has done that? Nobody. Nobody. The other thing I can't help but realize is that the thing on the airplane, it was already in the works when Joe Biden was president. So this was because Boeing couldn't deliver the new Air Force One fast enough. The nation of Qatar had the plane. It's going to require a lot of refurbishing and reconfiguration and all those things to make it an Air Force One. But it was already being proposed when Joe Biden was president. When President Trump came to Qatar, they announced it. It was the culmination of something that was already happening before he even became president. So yeah, it may have sounded like, hey, they're giving personally me this magnificent airplane, but it's really a gift to the country. And it was also to be a go-between between the time of the delivery of the ultimate Air Force One. This is an interim solution because apparently the one they're building is way, way overdue and is going to be overdue for quite some time.
I agree with you that it's impossible to sort of map Trump on a clean, like the traditional spectrum of left to right. And I think that is maybe most clear when it comes to the question of Iran. The Trump that we got in the first term was the Trump that scuttled the JCPOA, Obama's nuclear deal. He was the Trump that killed Qasem Soleimani, of course. He was the Trump surrounded by people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. This administration is very different. You know, this one is more characterized by people like Steve Witkoff, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, and people who are, isolationist is maybe the wrong word, but very much averse to the idea of any kind of military action anywhere in the world and are extremely keen to strike a nuclear deal with Iran. Before I talk to you about the parameters of such a deal, and there's been lots of headlines about it in recent days, the first question is just basic. Do you think it's possible to strike a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Well, I'm not sure that it would be because for 46 years they've said the same thing. They wanted to kill Israel and annihilate it. Then they wanted to come and murder everybody in the United States. That's not a message they just came up with recently. They've said it for 46 years. They've said it without interruption. They say it every week. Israel is the appetizer. The U.S. is the entree. When I hear people in America say, we don't have anything to do with the whole Iranian-Israeli thing. That's no concern to us. Are they deaf, dumb, and blind? Are they not listening for 46 years to what the Ayatollahs have said? When somebody tells you over and over and over and over again they're going to kill you, it might be wise to pay attention to them and start believing them. And Iran has never said anything other than they want to get rid of the little Satan, then they want to come after the great Satan, which is the United States. So when people act like that isolationism is a legitimate doctrine of foreign policy, I would say to them, look, there's nobody more MAGA than me. In fact, to go back and listen to some of the things I said in my 2008 presidential campaign, I was MAGA before MAGA was cool. But here's the difference. Being America first shouldn't mean America only. We live in a very real world. Relationships that we have with other countries doesn't mean that we're going to fight their wars. It doesn't mean we're going to put our men and women in boots and send them to do their bidding. Israel has never, now a lot of Americans don't know this, they have never, not one time since the Reconstitution in 1948, have they ever asked for or received American boots on the ground to fight their wars. They fight their own wars and they do it pretty sacrificially. Every single 18-year-old male and female goes into the military, 3 years for the men, 2 years for the women. They serve in the reserves until their 40s. And even after their 40s, they may be recalled, as some of them have, back into the reserves, going into Gaza, going to the Lebanon border. Mm-hmm. These are people who defend themselves, and they've never asked us to fight their wars for them. So anyone who says that is either ignorant or they're not honest.
Okay, well, there's a question about whether or not Tucker Carlson is ignorant or not honest, because as I'm sure you saw, this is what he said yesterday on Twitter about Mark Levin. Mark Levin was at the White House today, this was a few days ago, yesterday, lobbying for war with Iran. Levin has no plans to fight in this or any war, but he's demanding that American troops do it. Blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on and on. What do you make of that?
I've known Tucker Carlson since he was a an assistant editorial writer at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette working for Paul Greenberg in 1991. I don't know where this is coming from. I know Mark Levin very well, and I have a great deal of confidence in him. And he has never, ever suggested that Americans go and fight Israel's war for them, or even fight their war with them as if it means putting boots on the ground. But what he does understand is what I said a moment ago. The Iranian threat does not end at the borders of Israel. Even if they were able to annihilate Israel, they don't put the napkin to their mouth, put their fork down and say, we're done, we want no more. That's when they just are getting started. That was, as I say, the appetizer. And now they're ready for the entree. And the entree is the United States of America. You know, there were people back in the run-up to World War II that really thought that, you know, America had no role in getting involved in anything. Isolationism was really the prevailing wind. Pearl Harbor helped change that. And I think the virtual annihilation of Western civilization as we know it in Europe helped people to understand that you can sit it out only so long, but you're not just preserving Great Britain, France, or the Netherlands. You're preserving Western civilization upon which our culture is built. And if it falls and begins to continue falling, there comes a point at which it falls in your own backyard.
But you're basically saying in order to wake up to the threat, there needs to be some kind of mass casualty event a la Pearl Harbor or 9/11?
No, I don't. I think that we can be wiser than that. We shouldn't be caught off guard. We shouldn't be so naive about the threats that we face. I would love to see a diplomatic solution to the Iranian situation. That nothing would thrill me more. I think the president is pushing for that because he's really a president of peace. You know, his first 4 years as president, we didn't have any wars. We weren't fighting with anybody. He inherited a world that's on fire. I think he wants to put the fire out. And whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Iran, he would like to put the fire out. So, yeah, he's going to first and foremost send a negotiating team in all of these areas, as he has done to Gaza, as he has done to Russia, Ukraine, as he has done to Iran. And he's going to say, guys, let's not see millions of people or even hundreds of thousands of people killed. Let's find a way to bring peaceful solution. But the president is also not a forever patient person. And there will come a time at which he'll say, that's it. Let's keep in mind what he has said. And I always want to separate what he has said from what people have said he has said or what people think he believes. He has said repeatedly, Iran will never have a nuclear device. They must have a total dismantlement of their nuclear program. What they must do is end enrichment of all kinds. Those are his words. Those are his doctrines. I'm his ambassador here. My job is not to make the medicine. It's simply to dispense it. So he's the chemist. I'm the pharmacist. I listen. I open the bottle. I look at the medicine, and here's what it says. They're never going to have a nuclear device. They've got to dismantle what they have. They cannot have enrichment. That's what I'm dispensing.
There is an increasingly vocal and powerful part of the MAGA coalition that doesn't simply believe that there shouldn't be a strike on Iran by Israel and doesn't simply put out propaganda like that American troops would be involved in such a strike. But they say more than that Iran should be allowed to enrich some uranium in a deal. Tucker Carlson is making that case actively. He seems to have the ear of Donald Trump and certainly of the vice president. So there is a war going on inside the MAGA coalition, it seems to me, for the soul of its foreign policy. Yes or no? Do you agree that battle is underway?
I don't necessarily agree with that. And I'll tell you why. Because also we have Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, who is as strong as a field of California garlic when it comes to our policies in the Middle East and the rest of the world. Pete Hegseth, who is a strong a believer in and a person who understands the delicate balance that exists, that if Israel falls, it's not the only domino that's going down. So there are many people in this administration that I believe represent a very balanced America first, but not necessarily an America-only policy that recognizes that smart foreign policy doesn't get into every war, doesn't try to change every government, doesn't try to Americanize a country like Iraq or Afghanistan, which is never going to happen, doesn't try to nation build and go in and rebuild every other nation before we rebuild our own. Those are tenets of the America First movement that I absolutely wholeheartedly think the president is absolutely right about and why he was elected twice. So I don't buy into the idea that he somehow lost his mojo when it comes to dealing with Israel and Iran. I think he would love to see peace. He's going to do everything he can to bring it about. But I also think that there is a limit to his patience. And he himself has said, we're not going to negotiate this forever. And Iran's got to come to some understanding. And if they don't, he was asked on Air Force One on his way to the Pope's funeral, would Israel drag America into a war? I thought his answer was pretty blunt. He said, nobody's going to drag us into anything. But the point is, if there comes a real threat that could impact America, we won't be dragged into something. We will lead something. And I thought that was as clear can get.
So Donald Trump does not agree with Tucker Carlson on foreign policy.
I have no idea. I've never talked to him about Tucker Carlson, but he's not appointed Tucker Carlson to anything. He's appointed Marco Rubio. He's appointed Pete Hegseth. He's appointed me. He's appointed a lot of people who I think have a strong view of the long game here. And, I could wake up tomorrow and read his tweet and find out I'm coming home. I serve at the pleasure of the president. So I get that.
But you see what I'm getting at. I'm saying, Steve Witkoff is hugely trusted by this president. He seems much more amenable to a deal and sort of floated the idea that there could be some enrichment, then walked it back. If we're talking about sort of like camps in the foreign policy world, he certainly seems more at least is embraced, let's say, by the Tucker camp, which is far more America alone and far more isolationist. As opposed to like John Bolton or Mike Pompeo in Trump 1, which are total Iran hawks. I'm just trying to push you to help people that are confused, genuinely confused. And there's a lot of Free Press readers and listeners who really are like, I don't understand what the prevailing ethos is of this administration when it comes to the things that are so existentially important.
That's a very fair question. Very fair question. But what I would say is listen to what Donald Trump himself says. Don't listen to what I say. Don't listen to what anyone else says around him. Listen to what he says. And his consistency, I think, has been, as they said in the movie A Few Good Men, not just clear, crystal clear. And it has been. Whether it's Gaza and Hamas, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, and whether it's Iran, Israel, it's been clear. And on this issue of Iran, he said, I don't know how many times, they're never going to have a nuclear weapon. They're going to have total dismantlement. They can't have enrichment. They can't have centrifuges. They can't have reactors.
So is the upshot of that, Ambassador, that there won't be a deal? Because do you imagine that Iran would ever agree to a deal without any concessions about enrichment?
It's hard for me to think that there would be, but maybe they look at it and decide that to hold on to their regime is the best chance they have. I don't know. I don't know what's in their heads. I'm not that familiar with them except simply observing them. And I've observed them since they first took American hostages from the U.S. Embassy in 1979 in Tehran, had the revolution, and destroyed a wonderful culture, the Persian culture, one of the most beautiful, brilliant, aesthetic, artistic places on earth. And their people were well educated, and they were modern, and they were leaders in medicine and law and the antiquities and art. And you look at the culture that Iran had become, and you see what the Ayatollahs did to it. I can't see why anyone would say, boy, they really did some wonderful things there. No, they destroyed the great, ancient, and really valuable Persian culture. The Iranian people have suffered the most, and you have to hurt for them and feel for them. I don't think the Iranian government under the supreme leader is representative of the Iranian people. Many of them fled, but many of them didn't have the option or the opportunity, so they stayed. But do I think that they have bought in on this radical insanity that their main goal is to kill people and to annihilate entire nations and commit genocide? I don't believe that. I just don't.
Let's imagine a scenario in which Iran, in theory, agrees to a deal in exchange basically for sanctions relief, which is critical to them keeping power. And then they sign the deal, and it looks like a victory. And then Iran starts enriching uranium surreptitiously. What should happen in that case?
Well, I think the president has made it clear that if they were to make some deal and not keep it, then every option is on the table. And I think every option's on the table already. He's never taken anything off the table and said, here's what we will never do. He's not done that. I just think the Iranians are playing a very foolish game if they think that they can play Donald Trump as a chump. They can't. I'm going to tell you, he's a very incredibly brilliant guy. His intuitions are stunningly good. And sometimes he will say something, and I'll even ask myself, what in the world? And then a week or two later, you say, by golly, that was brilliant. When he said, let me give you an example. When he said, and none of us were expecting it, he said, I'm just going to take over Gaza. We're going to run the place. And everybody said, what? I mean, you had senators who were tearing their garments over it. But up until that moment, there wasn't a single Middle Eastern country that wanted a bit of Gaza. They didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to take any refugees, not one, not Jordan, not Egypt, not Saudi, not anybody. All of a sudden, he says that. I mean, within hours, you got everybody in the Middle East. Oh, well, we'll take a few. Yeah, we'll take some too. And hey, we want to be a part of this. We'll help build it. We don't want you to do it. We're going to have a part in it. So what was he doing? But he was moving the game off high center where it was stuck and the impasse was broken. One of the things that I love about this president is that he is not unwilling to pull the pin, roll the grenade in the middle of the room, and watch everybody scramble for the doors. And then when they get outside, he says, okay, now what are we going to do? Because he's a disruptor by his nature. He's courageous in that. And quite frankly, we're living in a world where the status quo and simply oiling the machinery that has been built by both Democrat and Republican administrations in foreign policy has been a colossal, abysmal failure. So one of my points of pride in being in this position is to be part of a team that looks at it completely differently and is willing to throw away the conventions that have failed and say, maybe we ought to try something that could work.
Ambassador, just last week, CNN and the New York Times reported that Netanyahu ordered Israeli national security officials to plan for a strike on Iran that would not require U.S. support or assistance. Do you think that Israel would launch a unilateral strike on Iran without American support?
I know firsthand that they believe that they need and want American support. And not just militarily. They want the president's blessing. Prime Minister of Israel understands there's no better friend he has in the world than President Trump. And President Trump has demonstrated that repeatedly. I think there comes a point Israel has to also defend itself. It's a sovereign nation. The U.S. doesn't need to get Israel's permission to do what it does. It doesn't need to ask Israel, is it okay that we go and try to have negotiations with Iran? Israel doesn't have to get our permission to do what it feels is necessary to defend itself. But here's the reality. Both nations do want the partnership of each other. So there is ongoing conversations. There's never been a time when these two countries have quit talking, have quit discussing, have quit working together. I remind people that America's got some friends, we have some allies, but we really only have one partner. That's Israel. The level of intelligence sharing that we have with Israel is unlike anything else on the planet. The level of sharing of military hardware, software, and strategy is unlike with any other nation we have. Part of the reason that Israel matters to America, and a lot of people never understand this, and I think some of the critics of Israel policy need to get a little better educated. Barry, there are 700,000 Americans living in Israel. 700,000. That's an entire congressional district. This is a tiny country. This is a country of the size of New Jersey, 15 million people total population, 700,000 Americans. Americans have died in October 7th in the Gaza war. They've died as hostages. If the Iranians were to launch a major ballistic attack on Israel and hit a high rise in Tel Aviv, there'll be American citizens who will almost inevitably be part of the carnage. There's been very few days over a period of 2 or 3 days that I haven't had to hear the sirens, head to the shelter, because the Houthis have tried to light up the sky with one of their ballistic missiles. It's not every day, but it's like every third day. And somewhere in Israel, somebody's listening to a siren and they're running for the shelters. Most Americans don't understand that. But they don't understand that there are more Americans living in Israel than any other country on earth other than Mexico in a foreign country. Mexico is number one. Makes sense. You got California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, all right there on the border, major population states. But think about this. There are more Americans in Israel than in Canada, the UK, Italy, France, Spain, Australia, Japan, any other place in the world. You can't say that America's attitude toward Israel can be an isolationist policy, because you're really abandoning a huge swath of Americans. It's not abandoning just Israelis. It's abandoning Americans as well.
Mike, I think it was the first Friday night you were in Israel, you had dinner with your wife and the prime minister and his wife. I think I'm getting that right.
Yeah.
What was the number one biggest concern on his mind? Was it the war in Gaza, or was it Iran getting a nuclear weapon?
Well, I think he understands that Iran is the funder and really the inspiration of everything that happened in Gaza. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, they're all proxies. They are empowered by Iran. That's where they get a lot of their hardware. It is where they get a lot of their philosophical fanaticism. And it is also where they get most of their funding. President Trump had shut the funding down in his first term by putting on the maximum pressure that he did. And it doggone near bankrupted Iran. They were on their way to that level of bankruptcy. And quite frankly, look, the president would rather bankrupt them than bomb them. I mean, that's his view. It would be better to crush them financially than it would be to crush them militarily. But he's also a president that has the limits of his patience. When he makes an offer, he tries to be fair and honest about it. But if somebody plays him and attempts to game him, it will not end well for them. He outsmarts them every time. And so when we're talking about Gaza or talking about Iran, we're really talking about people that are serving dishes, some labeled Houthi, some labeled Hamas, some labeled Hezbollah. But all of those dishes, different plates, they all come from the same kitchen. They all come from Tehran, every one of them. And we never can forget that.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the press's coverage of this war. The story that has dominated the past week is the question of aid in Gaza. And I'll just say a few things to sort of set this up for the listener. Obviously, I know you know all of this. Aid to the Palestinians has historically been handled by UNRWA, a UN organization that Israeli intelligence, beyond Israeli intelligence, there's been a lot of proof of this, says has been infiltrated by Hamas. And indeed, that some members of UNRWA, school teachers and otherwise, literally participated in October 7th. We also know that Hamas uses this aid as a way to enrich itself. It basically steals the aid meant for the Palestinian people in Gaza, resells it on the black market, uses that funding as a way to enrich itself, and basically turns the goodwill of the world into a revenue stream for itself. About $500 million last year went to Hamas. Okay. Now enter onto the scene this new organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has basically said, let's make an end run around Hamas and around the UN. We're going to use an American military contractor to run this new aid program. And basically, it's terrible for Hamas because Hamas benefits from the aid and benefits from the immiseration of ordinary Gazans. And Hamas is incentivized to make things go very badly for this new organization on the scene, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And basically, this has led, am I getting this accurate so far?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
far.
this has
Yeah.
led to a number of stories over the past 2 weeks or so alleging not just chaos at these aid sites, but murderous rampages on the part of the IDF. The biggest story was this story that went viral. It was covered by every single mainstream news organization, claiming that the IDF opened fire on Palestinians queuing for aid and murdered around 30 people. This story was in the AP, it was in Reuters, The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times. But that isn't what happened. And those numbers came from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. And now you have many of these news organizations quietly correcting the claim, taking down social media posts, saying that, they overstated it, issuing clarifications, issuing corrections, but it's too late. The story already rocketed around the world. And I wondered, A, what you think about our media environment, and B, who should be held accountable for these kind of errors at this point, 600 days into the war, when we know that the Gaza Health Ministry is Hamas and not an organization that can be relied on to tell the truth?
I was outraged when I saw these media reports that came out. And part of the reason was because I knew absolutely that what they were reporting was a lie. I'm getting firsthand reports from the eyewitnesses, the people who are actually there. We helped stand up GHF. We helped create it. The U.S. did it because the president gave us a marching order. And here's what he said: get humanitarian efforts into Gaza, help the civilians, but do it in a way that Hamas can't steal it. Because they had been, just as you mentioned, Barry, they've been stealing it and then selling it at twice the retail market price to the very people who were supposed to get it for free as a humanitarian gesture. With that money, they continued to buy arms, they restocked their supply, and they murdered people. This is, to me, what happened this past weekend when the AP and CNN and the Washington Post and the New York Times all ran with this story that was based on nothing more than simply parroting Hamas organs and Al Jazeera, the only two sources they had. And even in their stories, they never really talked about October the 7th or how many hostages there were or how they'd been treated. They just presented it as if it was true. And I unloaded on them because I felt like that, and so did Secretary Rubio, because it was not only false, but it was recklessly irresponsible for them to go out and call themselves a news organization that did not do any better job of researching their story and getting eyewitnesses' accounts. It would have been one thing if they said there are reports that come out of the Hamas-fed news agency, but it is being denied by the IDF and by GHF and by the American government, all of which would have been a fair story. They didn't do that. They reported it as fact when it was an outright lie. There was no chaos. There was no murder. There was no mass shooting. That did not happen.
Was anyone killed? Was anyone killed by the IDF? What was the truth of that incident?
No. There was one incident this week in which some people, not at the food distribution site, it was well before they got there, several kilometers before they were near the site, and they veered off the marked course that they could use. They were told to stop. They didn't. They were fired upon. Now, in the fog of war and in the confusion of things, nobody is happy about it. In fact, GHF paused their feeding for a while to make sure that they could get a better handle on the access to the sites. But the truth was, it was because people went outside of what they were told that they could do to get to the sites. But what happened last week, the story that you and I are talking about right now, it was not, there were no casualties, there were no fatalities, there was no chaos. All of that was an outright lie. Now, interestingly, the Washington Post took their story down. You had others that, as you mentioned, started correcting, even though it was ever so subtle, and they did it over a few days of social media corrections and just taking things out or maybe adding a piece in there about that there were other sources that denied it, which they didn't put in their original story. So it was, to me, a pretty cowardly way, rather than just saying, we really goofed this up. We were inaccurate. We were wrong. And we ran with the story because we were more interested in being first than being accurate, and it was very hurtful. And I further believe that this is contributing to the anti-Semitic attitude and bias that's going on that has resulted in two being murdered coming out of a peace event in Washington, and then a Holocaust survivor, for God's sake, being one of the people targeted in an attack with Molotov cocktails by some crazed person yelling "Free Palestine." This ought to be concerning, and everybody needs to be more responsible than to help create that kind of climate. It's very dangerous. Let me add one thing about the young people. The young man who was murdered, an Israeli,
Yaron Lashinsky. Yeah.
Yes, and Yaron was supposed to come back to Israel, to Jerusalem, last week to propose to Sarah, who was going to be his wife. And he bought a ring. He was going to come back. I went to Yaron's home to meet with his family. I found out, I didn't know it until I first talked to the family, that Yaron's father worked for one of my very best Israeli friends. I mean, this is a small country. Everybody has a connection. I had no idea that I actually had a connection to Yaron through my best friend's employee. It was a shock to me, and what a tragedy for these families. That's why people need to be more careful about fanning the flames of Jewish hate, which I don't understand. I think it's the most irrational nonsense. And I do believe there's a reason that it does exist and why it's rearing its ugly head so viciously. But we need to call it out.
What do you think the reason is?
I think that in a world where people have turned their back on a God of absolute truth, a God that says some things are right, some things are wrong. If you really do hate the God of the universe, the creator, the one who gave us the law, the light, then you look for someone to represent that God that you can put your hate toward. Well, that would be the Jewish people, because it is through the Jewish people, through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through the giving of the law through Moses, it is through the long history of the Jewish people who have believed that we are individually accountable to God, responsible for our actions. And that plus the Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian foundation, is the foundation of all of Western civilization. Take that away, and we don't have a civilization. We have a world in which people live as it was in the time of the Judges, the Old Testament book that says everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Everybody becomes his or her own God. So anti-Semitism...
Mike, connect that to the murder of Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, in which the manifesto of the alleged killer, Elias Rodriguez, this is not a foaming at the mouth, mentally deranged person that's, only hanging out on gab.com. This is an articulate, it was evil, but he had a very articulate explanation of what he did.
He exhibited a level of methodical, intentional hate. It was not just a rash moment of a sudden hate crime that overcame him. This was a person, as most of these really anti-Semitic criminals are, who think deep and hard about it and believe they're doing a service, believe they're going to free Palestine, believe they're going to free the oppressed people, and believe that the Jewish people are the ones who are the oppressors. They're the people who are committing genocide and apartheid, all of which is not true, but they have convinced themselves that it is because they have a basic hatred and an animosity toward those who represent a civilization that says some things are right, some things are wrong, and there is a God, and he has revealed himself in the world. And from a spiritual perspective, and I'm not saying this as a Jew because I'm not Jewish, I'm Christian, but I understand that my own faith is 100% empirically based on the Jewish foundation that is the foundation for not just my faith, but for my civilization and for my moral code of what's right and what's wrong.
Do you think that legacy media outlets are responsible for creating the permission structure for the open hatred of Jews that we're beginning to see in America?
It might be a stretch to say they created it. It would not be a stretch to say that they have contributed to it. There's a difference between creation and contribution. I'm not saying that they're the the author of it, that they've been the source, but by their unfair reporting, by their unwillingness to even challenge the people out there on university campuses saying, from the river to the sea, without asking them, do you know what river? Do you know what sea? And what do you want the world to look like? And if the river to the sea becomes the reality, where are the Jewish people? Is there a Jewish state still left? And if not, why not? Where does it go? What happens to the Jewish people in the world? Don't they have a right to a place of safety and security? They almost were annihilated in World War II by Hitler, who killed 6 million of them. Do you really think that it would be okay to finish that off? I mean, those are questions that the media need to be asking these so-called intellectual students who have enough money to go to Harvard or Columbia. And instead, they're out there chanting a bunch of nonsense. Who pays for that insanity on these campuses? And by that, I mean, who's paying for the very structured, the same tents, pre-printed signs?
Why don't we
that
know
costs a lot of money.
Why don't we know the answer to that?
I'm not sure we've asked the hard questions, and I hope we start. But isn't that part of the job of the media, is to raise
part of the
those
job
questions?
of the media, but also maybe part of the job of the Senate. There was a really interesting story, I'll send it to you, that came out today by a guy called Zach Goldberg in Tablet. And he basically tracked the use of the word genocide with historic genocide cases. So Rwanda, Darfur, Bosnia. And he found that coverage linking Israel with genocide surged far beyond every other agreed upon historical case of genocide across all of the outlets he imagined. I just want to read this data point to you because it was pretty mind-blowing. In the New York Times, articles pairing Israel and genocide reached levels more than 9 times higher than the peak for Rwanda, in which 800,000 people were murdered in 100 days. In the New York Times, nearly 6 times greater than coverage of Darfur, where 200,000 people were killed. What is going on here? Is it a unique obsession with Israel? Going back to the earlier conversation, is it ignorance? Is it open rank dishonesty? Is it the idea that, Jews or Israel sells papers? What's going on, Mike?
It's hard to know. It's just so irrational, and it's so lacking of fact. I'm stunned by what you just read to me. I had not heard that before, and I appreciate you sending it to me. I want to see it. I was in Rwanda not too many years after the genocide there, and I talked to people that survived it, and even they were shocked by what they were part of. But it was genuine genocide there. It was family killing family and neighbor killing neighbor. It was wanton, just slaughter. To say that Israel has been involved in something like that is recklessly irresponsible, and it is factually off the charts untrue. And that's what's so hurtful. So if you create this idea that the Jewish people are responsible for X, Y, and Z, and all of those things are evil, you really are hearkening back to the very foundation of what led to the Holocaust, which was when Hitler and others began to say the Jewish people are responsible for all of the economic problems, are responsible for your oppression, your problems, the reason you don't have bread and you don't have a decent life. It becomes easy to target people and then to believe that if they're that bad, you ought to get rid of them. I mean, I can't tell you how really frightened I am for my Jewish friends. And it's one of the things that I believe it's my responsibility is to say, I'm not going to stand behind you because that means way behind you. I pledge to stand with you. I owe my own faith. I have a debt to the Jewish people and to the Jewish faith because of my faith. And for me to look the other way and pretend this isn't happening would be morally reprehensible. And I think I would pay before God himself for being so derelict in a responsibility.
Mike, are you surprised at how much anti-Semitism has exploded in America?
I am because it's happening in places you don't expect it. You expect this to be the rantings of people who are uneducated, illiterate, who listen to crazy talk and don't have any reason not to believe it because they're by and large superstitious or engage in absorbing conspiracy theories. These are university students whose parents are paying $70,000, $80,000 a year for their little darlings to go and become useful idiots to the far left and to the most radical, destructive causes in the world today. And yeah, I'm surprised, not that it's happening as much as I'm surprised by who's leading it, where it's happening, and how it's even being defended by the people who run those campuses, who rather than saying, we won't tolerate it, we're not going to let our Jewish students be intimidated, spit upon, impeded from going to class. Instead, we're going to act like cowards without spines, and we're going to say, well, there's really nothing we can do, and it's all about free speech. No, it is about denying the basic fundamental right of civil behavior and participation in the college they have paid for to the Jewish students who are being targeted.
I think that, at the Free Press, we've done a tremendous amount to document anti-Semitism on the left and inside elite, once important, still important in many ways, American institutions. The news story, I think, is the rising anti-Semitism on the cultural right. And we ran a very important piece earlier this week by Rod Dreher about this phenomenon. I wonder if you are paying attention to it and how worried you are about it, about the kind of information, especially that's reaching young men that spend a lot of time on the internet.
Well, I'm very concerned about it because it's not some place I expected it to see it come from. I really expected it from the far left. I did not expect it from people on the right. And some are people that, honestly, they know better, or they ought to know better. And I don't understand how they've even come to these conclusions. But I'm concerned because if they can be this wrong and have the intellectual horsepower to know better, but they're not learning it better, that is of grave concern to me, because it says that it's not the ignorant we need to fear. It's the intelligentsia, the people who pretend to be smarter than the rest of us, but who show a level of ignorance that is incredibly dangerous to the future of this world.
One of the things that has been profound for me to watch, even as I know a tremendous amount about Jewish history, not a tremendous amount, but more than most people, I would say, is the way in which October 7th catalyzed hatred of Jews and Israel. Why? What is it about the structure of our civilization or the nature of human beings that the most murderous attack on Jews since the Holocaust led to an increase, not in empathy for the Jews, but absolute hatred of us? What explains it?
I guess the only thing I can understand is that just as Kristallnacht should have been a wake-up to the world, it was instead a time where people started almost believing the lies that the Jews were bad and they needed to be exterminated. What a horrible thing happened then. And we kept saying, never again, never again, never again. And here we are, we're seeing it again. Why? Because instead of October 7th being the wake-up call that Jews were under attack and they were being targeted specifically because they were Jews, we had people who instead said they had it coming. They had it coming because they have been oppressive and they haven't allowed freedom, which is not true. That is maybe the bigger concern to me, because it means that people have had access to the truth, but they have resisted even acknowledging it. And that puts us in a very dangerous place. And when your leaders and when the most intelligent people, supposedly intelligent people, begin to push this lie, it does reflect back on the day in the rise in Nazi Germany. People forget that the Nazi, or the Germans at the time, were the most intellectually superior people on earth. They had the best scientists, they had the best doctors, they had the best philosophers. Quite frankly, they had the best theologians. That's really scary, isn't it? They had the best theologians in the whole world. And yet, it was out of that incredibly intellectual powerhouse that came the Holocaust, in which people were denied being treated as equal to other human beings and targeted for extermination and extinction because somebody had decided that they were not worthy of living. If that kind of thing starts happening again, and it is, then we ought to be very fearful for what's happening to our culture. Again, this isn't about the politics or the geopolitics of whose land and where they should live. No. This is about a basic tenet of civilized behavior of people. When you deny that other people, oh, Barry, that's the siren. I got 90 seconds. I've got to go. I'm so sorry.
Go.
But that's the world we live in Israel. So,
okay, be safe.
Bye.
And that's how the interview ended with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. Obviously, not our typical ending, but we were very appreciative for the time that we had with a very busy ambassador. And as always, thanks to you for listening. If you like this conversation, if it made you think differently, share it with your friends and family and use it to have a conversation of your own. Last but not least, if you want to support Honestly, there is only one way to do it. It's by going to the Free Press's website at thefp.com and becoming a subscriber today for just $10 a month. We'll see you next time.